Hi, it's Mike Stephenson here. In today's video, we're going to talk about a feature in Turbo 360 called BAM data queries. And today we're going to look at a use case of leveraging this with Logic Apps Standard. So first off, let's have a look at the architecture of how this works. So I have my Logic Apps Standard workflow over here on the right-hand side. I'm leveraging the out-of-the-box application insights features. That means telemetry from my Logic app goes into App Insights, and under the hood, that gets stored into Log Analytics. Now, what I'm able to do with Turbo 360 is I can use these data sources as the underlying data for creating a business process view that I can allow either business users or support operators to have a view of what's going on in my integration platform without them needing to be technical experts that understand technologies like functions and logic apps. So this is where Turbo 360 will execute queries to see those data sources. Now, what we're going to have to do next is have a look at how we would leverage this with Logic Apps Standard. So to begin with, I'm going to have a look over here in the Azure portal, and I've got a Logic Apps Standard workflow that comes up here. Now, what you'll note is we have two flavors of data sources for the business activity monitoring feature. So in this screen, you can see we also use this same Logic app in our other demos as well. So this is where previously you had to have this shape in here doing a BAM call. So what we can do now is we can actually not use that shape at all, and we can just use the data that's going to application insights. Every shape in the Logic app is going to be sending data to App Insights, and I'm basically going to look for shapes like this parse JSON one and this HTTP update in SAP, because they're the two key things my business user cares about. So we're going to look for the events for those shape and create a friendly view of what's going on. Now, let's have a look at how we do this with Turbo 360. So here I've got tree view on the left-hand side, modeling my business processes. We're in the data queries type up here, if you notice at the top where it says business process group. And what I can do here is I can then start having different technologies can be used in different processes here. So in some of my other demos, I'll be using things like Data Factory, App Insight, API management. But in this one, we're going to look at Logic App Standard. Now, actually, in my Railcar management one, there's multiple transactions here, and one of them's from Logic App Consumption, and the others are Logic App Standard. So what we can do, if I come in first as a user, we'll start at the top level and work down. So I can come in here, and I actually have some saved queries. So we're going to open up my loaded Railcar to SAP. And what this user would see is this query shows them a bunch of transactions that have been processed. So you can see I've even included shapes telling me which workflow was it that ran, what was the name of the workflow and the run ID. And we get useful information like the Railcar ID, load slip ID, which is the instance of the Railcar, the product. And I could see if there was any failed, they would flag up here on the left. And I can click on this transaction here and it'll open up the details. So you can see in this case, this workflow, it could have just half a dozen shapes in it. It could have 100 shapes in. But the business user and the support user only care about these really high-level milestones. So in this case, they care, was the message received and validated, and did SAP get updated correctly? Now, what I can do is I can click on these shapes and view more details. So here I can see some details that my query projected out. So I can see things like, was it successful? How long did it take? Custom dimensions here, so I can project out things like run IDs. I can also project out things like custom track properties from the workflow. And you can see I've got a lot of options of what I can show here. Now, I think if I remember right, I'm just showing everything the query returns, but you can limit that in a KQL query by choosing which columns you want to project out. Now, that's really the user view. We can also do other things like create dashboards here. So there'll be some dashboards show up showing me summaries of what's going on, so I can see how many were successful, the profile of how many cars I've processed each day, and that kind of thing, and how many messages we've processed for each rail car. So I can actually build this dashboard up here. So I could maybe add a new widget. I can choose a query, and I can choose what kind of widget I want. So I can really customize this dashboard to create the right view for this idea of a single page for the person who cares about railcar management. I can also do some monitoring features. So if we look over here, I can configure. So at the minute I've got this every 15 minutes, we'll go and check the status of our transactions. Any issues I'm going to raise to a Teams channel. And then I've just used a query at the bottom here. So if we edit this, you can see I'm using my loaded railcar to SAP, and I've just put a filter that says if anything failed, if there's one failure, we raise a warning. If there's two or more, we raise an error, and that'll just alert out to tell me that somebody needs to go and check what happened with a message. Now, the questions, we've got a lot of good features here available to make it really easy for your users to see what's happening in this integration platform. So how do we start actually leveraging this? So in this case, imagine you've got a Logic App Standard. You haven't touched it for anything to do with Turbo 360 at this point. It's already been in production for 3 months, maybe. The only prerequisite is you've got it configured with Application Insights integration. And in this case, that's really a default setting most people are already using anyway. So what I would do is I'd go and build a transaction over here, and we'll have a look at the one that I've already built, but we'd start off by clicking add to create a new transaction, and this one loaded railcar to SAP, so I can give it a name, I can give a description of what's going on. I can also do things like indicate the direction, which is used for a UI visualization. I would then choose what my data source is. So in this case, I'm choosing App Insights. Now, my transaction, the different steps in the transaction can actually come from different data sources. So I could use Log Analytics for a stage later on, but the core transaction may come from App Insights, and I've chosen which Insights instance I'm going to execute the query against. Now here's the query that I've used in this case. So we're going to have a look at this query in a minute. It's quite a complicated query, so we'll provide a bunch of guidance on the kinds of query that you might build. But I would put my query in here, I'd execute it, and then I'll get some properties that got optional settings that come up. So the first one is that when we want to correlate events, we need to know what we're going to correlate on. So here I could choose fields that I want to make available for correlating shapes in the diagram. So in this case, I really just need the run ID. I'm then going to indicate the run ID is actually the kind of the primary key or the instance ID. I've got fields in my query for the start, the end, and the duration, so I can kind of map these to fields that Turbo 360 has out the box. And then I can do a status mapping at the bottom. So I've got a field called overall status where I can just say if that's like failed, then it'll be a failure. In progress, it'll be in progress, and success. We also have options for batch transactions. So you can be able to have a parent transaction, and then you can drill into it to see the children, which is sort of a slightly more advanced feature for those batch scenarios. Now, what we'll do before I jump to the children on the diagram, we'll just take a look at what that parent query looks like. So here you can see, if I just drag this down a little bit, this is the query that I'm executing to get the details out. So what I've done is sit, and we'll share these queries with these videos, but the sample at the top, I've got some input variables up here that I use to be able to see which workflow am I looking at and which shape am I looking at. And then after that, what we've really got is this bit here. So down to there. That's executing a query that looks for the start action. So in this case, there's different ways I can indicate the start of a transaction. So I might look for the workflow start event, but in my case, I'm looking for an action in the workflow. That's the parsed JSON shape here. because I know that's got some properties on it that I want to display as well. So I'm basically looking for that event. So here my filters will look for a given workflow. And then this bit here, I'm actually promoting all of, or extending to create fields for those tracked properties so I can easily show them in the grid. And I also have my start and my start success here. The next bit, this bit here, we actually look for the end of the transaction. So I'm looking for that end event. Again, I'm going to match it on, I'm looking for things based on the same workflow. In this case, it could theoretically be a different workflow potentially. And I'm extending the run ID and the end time. And then down here, what I'm doing is I basically do a join between those two tables. So I say, take my start event, join to the end events on the run ID, and that'll give me an aggregated table of those two lists of events. And then in this case, I'm going to choose to extend. So I'm doing some calculated fields here. So this one here maps my status, so it's nice and friendly for me to use. And then I'm also going to extend the duration by just subtracting the start time from the end time. And then the last bit is I'm going to project out just the columns that I want. So instead of having everything, I'm just going to filter it down. So I've just got maybe the dozen columns that I care about in this case. And that query then can be used to can be used in Turbo 360. Now, what I think we'll find is a lot of customers will basically want a query almost the same as this, which is why I've parameterized it at the top. So you could just do a query that looks for a start and an end action. And then probably the bit that would change would be these promoted properties that you care about. The rest of it probably is a really solid template that you can just use on different scenarios that you might be implementing. Now, if we go back to Turbo 360, so we've looked at the parent transaction. Now let's look at the individual actions. So here, what I'm doing, if I want to add a new stage, I would give it a name, indicate the data source for it. So in this case, let's say App Insights again. I'll take my logic app one, and then I would paste the query in here. And it's just the same as the transaction, but you're just looking for a specific action that would map to this shape on the diagram. So if I have a look here and I say, this is my query, which again we'll look at in a moment. Now the key bit in this query that's a little bit different is this workflow ID here. So because I promoted on the transaction level properties that were available for correlation, I've got this workflow run ID available, and I can just use the curly brackets around it to indicate it's a parameter. So when we inject this, or we run this query, we'll inject the run ID there, and that'll basically let you look for ones that match this workflow run instance. Again, I'm going to project a bunch of properties out. And then if we look in the optional fields down here, I've chosen for the stage, I'm not really going to map anything particularly. These are really just used for UI visualization anyway, at the stage level. I'm going to map the fields like before. So in this case, I think on that query for the stage, I hadn't actually done the case statement. So I was just using I think it's the success field I was using. So failure or success there works. And then at the bottom, I can also indicate an icon that I want to use. So in this case, I'll use the logic app icon. And basically these two stages are the same. And if we look at the query for one of those stages, so you can see here, so what we're really doing here is again, I've parameterized it so it's easy for people to reuse this query. So we're looking for a request for a specific workflow and a specific action name. But I'm going to inject in to the query the run ID. I'm going to then extend a bunch of columns for the things that I might want to pull out of like nested fields, so particularly the track properties. And then what you might also do is you might put a project down at the bottom here if you want to limit the list of fields that go back to the user. In this case, I've just returned everything, which is why you saw that big list, but you can filter that further if you wanted to. And then I'll just use that query in Turbo 360. So let me just remove my marks here. So I use that query in Turbo 360 for the action, and that's how quick and easy it is to set my transaction up. So really, for me, if you've already got that existing logic app, you should be able to, in about 10 or 15 minutes, have this BAM view on top of it just by crafting a few queries using our starter queries. And you can basically create this view here, set your monitoring up, and you're up and running really quickly. So we hope this really helps level up and empower customers doing particularly Azure integration solutions to create these BAM-friendly views based on the logging that they already have available in App Insights. Thank you for listening to this video.